Welcome to Syntax. Today we've got an awesome episode for you today on the local first landscape. There are lots of libraries, frameworks, helpers in the local first space, lo-fi, as a lot of y'all like to call it. But sometimes they do a lot and sometimes they do a little. And today we're going to come at you with an explanation of what does the local first landscape look like? Real quick before we get into it, let me tell you about a behind the code discussion with backend experts that's coming up with Sentry. It's on Tuesday, July 16th. So about a week after you're listening to this. And we'll have Taylor Otwell from, he's obviously CEO, founder of Laravel, Paul Copplestone from Supabase, Soren Schmidt from Prisma, Gitz from Node Technicals TSC. We had him on the episode, and Sarah Guthals from Sentry. Check it on out. We'll have the link in the show notes. You can sign on up, and it's going to be an awesome little panel. How's it going today, Scott?
Hey, it's going good. Yeah, summertime, kids are home. You're doing all that stuff. Yeah, just feeling all that kids camps and all the school stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm sure you guys are feeling it too. You're out at the cabin, getting that summer life in.
Oh yeah, our kids are at camp the next 2 weeks as well, which is I never went to camp as a kid, and I always hated the camp kids. I didn't hate them, but camp kids always talk about camp, and all their jokes are about someone at camp, and it's like somebody who does CrossFit. They just cannot not talk about camp. And now my kids are going to camp, so I'm kind of curious if they're going to become those kids.
Yeah, and it seems to be a thing. I don't remember this when I was a kid, but it seems like, especially with working parents and stuff, it's all right, summer's here, kids going to camp.
The camp is nuts. My wife's in January, the first week of January, she's on group chat with all the other moms, being all right, camp's coming up, and some of them will get, my wife's friend has 4 kids. I guess we have 4 kids as well, but so she'll get her grandparents and her sister, and everybody will be up at 7 a.m. Everybody's got a computer in order to get them registered in time for camp. And it's a wild world.
Yeah. Luckily we live by a university, and the kids camp stuff that they have at universities, at least at ours, is so good. He can learn ice skating or play soccer all day or go and do different sports at the college. And then most of the teachers are student athletes. So he could get a nice bit of experience, lacrosse and hockey and swimming or whatever, So yeah. So let's get into the local first stuff. I've been diving deep into this for a little while, and I've been exploring this space for quite a bit now, but I really got my hands dirty with some applications, and I'm going to show you some really primitive and some less primitive applications. I'm going to show you different libraries. I'm going to show you real code. I'm going to show you the working applications running in my local host. So I have a lot of stuff to show. I wrote a blog post on this. It's on my website. I'll link that up. But we'll basically be covering a lot of the same ground here. Basically, local first, we're not going to get too much deep into the deep description of it because we have a whole episode on that. Check it out. We'll link that up in the show notes as well. Local first is really just this idea of your application is running the data locally first. It's running your application's data directly from the browser. It's not having to load it off network. Just like how your phones use a SQLite database on the phone when it uses a native app, it saves directly to that. That's why you're not having to wait for a network request. You're not having to do things like optimistic UI because the UI is super fast already. It's saving it directly to a file on your machine. And then the network sync all happens in the background. You tend not to think about it. And my thoughts on this generally is that most of the best applications you're using today, the stuff that you use and you say, dang, this is fast, this is good, is built with this technology, especially if it's a web app. And
do you have any examples of local first apps that you use daily that are just
So I don't use Linear daily, but I have used Linear, and that's the one that I know a lot of people use. That's local first. An app that I have been using locally daily is called Tweak.so. tweek.so. It's a to-do list app that is incredibly awesome. It's super duper simple, but very fast. Superhuman is a email client that a lot of people use that's local first. And a lot of these things are really just taking the ideas from native app development and applying them into the web. And because of that, you get applications that load instantly. In fact, my habit tracker, Wes, that I've moved over now to being local first on my machine, it loads in 50 milliseconds.
Wow.
It's absurd. So the loading times are very, very fast, right? Because you're not having to do a network request before your application loads. The local is private because it's stored on your application, unless, of course, you set up syncing, then it becomes a different story, right? Then you have to worry about that. If it's just local, then you don't even have to worry about auth, because auth is not a thing on your own device, right? You're already authenticated into your own device, your own browser, whatever. So
you pass that on to the device or browser, like you said.
Yeah, and many of these applications, is the way they work is they'll let you get started, and then the moment that you sign up is when you want to start syncing your data off of the device, right? So auth still becomes a thing, and it's still a thing you have to think about. But if you're just running locally, it's a different kind of story if that data runs locally. Either way, there's a lot of things that make something local first, and I highly recommend checking out localfirstweb.dev and reading all this stuff, watching some of these videos, or just listening to the episode we did on it. We cover it pretty well. So that feels like, cool, I got this, right? Then you get into the build side of this website, and you see all these different tools, and you start clicking on them, and you start looking at the diagrams and wondering, oh my, I'm in over my head, right? There's a lot here. There's language like CRDTs for conflict resolution. There's syncing engines. There's different types of local databases, and it can really make your head spin. So I gave a handful of these a try. I use a SvelteKit code base, but you can use anything. Doesn't matter, obviously. I gave a lot of these a try, and we're going to start kind of from the side of things where the platform is doing the very most for you, okay? Because that's the way this works, is that some of these do everything for you, as in they store your data, they sync your data, they handle the data on the client side. All you do is write a query and you write a mutation, that data changes, it's synced, it's stored, everything. And then there's other ones that say you already have data or you want more control over your data, where that data lives or how that data lives. And what we're going to do is we're going to provide the storing it locally and the syncing of the data and the conflict resolution, or they're just going to handle that conflict resolution, or they're just going to handle the syncing. There's like so many different little facets here. So they either go from doing a whole lot for you to very, very little, depending on how much control you want over your data and how your app works.
Do you think that there are so many options right now because people want to integrate them into existing systems? Is there a lot because we're early in the sort of lo-fi system? Like, is it eventually going to be like, oh, I need state management for React? There's probably 3 or 4 like solid options. Do you think we'll ever get there, or do you think that this is a little bit more peeled back than that?
Yeah, I think we'll get there. What I think is more likely is that a lot of the platforms that we might use might implement these types of features into their platform, or perhaps they link it in like a plugin type of way. You're going to see many of these things have a Supabase like add-on. And like if you're using Supabase, you might be in the best place to utilize any of these things, because Supabase has a lot of connectivity with a lot of these things. So in other ways, people come from having a lot of their own data or their own systems. And as somebody who just converted a website that was not built to be local first, that's tough, because as we'll get into, you have to deal with like row versioning. You have to deal with like, how does the content actually delete when you have these types of systems, the patches, all these types of things. The history of the data doesn't exist if you're applying it to data that already exists. So it's a whole world, right? And so let's start at the very most basic. And so this is one that I used called Triplit. Triplit is really pretty neat. Looks like they just had a new release, but Triplit is a do everything for me type of platform. It's the full stack database. So this thing is really pretty neat. It's neat because it is open source. You can host it yourself if you want. I am hosting my own. It gives you offline support, a real-time sync. It's TypeScript and everything like that. And for the most part, you're pretty much just using their query syntax to do everything. So you utilize a query syntax, which, it's their own query language, but it's ultimately pretty easy to parse. You're going to have to... Yeah.
Is this a hosted thing that you... No, it wouldn't make sense if it was a hosted. Why is there pricing?
So with many of these things, you need two types of server instances. So they can be often hosted on the same server or a separate server or whatever.
Okay.
But you have to think about it this way. You have one, the syncing server, that thing is handling the conflict resolution and handling the syncing side of things. Then you have your actual server that's storing the data, right? You're handling your database fetches and updates.
Okay.
So many times those are the same thing. And in Triplit, it's the same thing. So in Triplit, the syncing server and the data server are all one, and it's kind of like a black box. Triplit understands that, to build an open source project, maybe you need a product behind it, and that product is a fully managed one of these things. So a fully managed data host that includes a nice little backend, mind you, too. Like the UI has like a full like table backend type of deal.
Okay, so this is like Triplit would be, if you were to like look at existing database solutions, it would be your MongoDB or your MySQL, but it's also your like Drizzle, right? Like your schema definition in query language. But then it's also your like Tanstack query or whatever, which you use on the client side. So it's everything, which I guess is why you're doing this one first.
Exactly. It's everything. You can see this is what like creating a schema and something like this does.
Okay.
And this is a good option if you, trust that this product's going to be around in some time. Granted, you can host it yourself, and there is like active development on it. I've been in their Discord. I've been working on it. It's really nice. If you're starting a project from scratch and you want the easiest possible solution, both this one and the next one I'm going to show you are it, because they work very well. And a lot of the docs show React, but like I said, this is a SvelteKit site. You can see, add. You can see it adds it instantly to my list. Not only does this add this...
Can you open the network tab and do one? I'm curious what that looks like.
So I'm not even clearing this. So you can see nothing in the network tab, no requests. We do have this WebSocket transport that's always open. I don't know, does that show you the messages here? Yeah, let's see the messages in the WebSocket. Oh, come on. Where are the little grabbies?
Finding the grabbies is one of the hardest things.
Yeah, if you have a double thick line. Okay, yeah, so here it is. You can see it's being done over the WebSocket here. So that's really nice and easy, right? And if we take a look at the application, this is the Triplit. We have Replicache, which you can see looks interesting, and the Triplit outbox, which again looks interesting. Many of these things look interesting because they're not handling data in the types of ways that we're used to. They're thinking about like the collective patches and things of the data. Like, what is the history of the data? When I do something, it's this has been added to this, has been added to this. Like, what's the version of the software? There's a lot more here than just like, here's a database full of all the data, which is why these things are so tough. So this thing, as you can tell, if I refresh it, you can see it's persistent. This is being stored locally. It's being backed up to a database offsite that I'm running on my own Coolify as well. And that's all being done. All I'm doing is instantiating a Triplit client. I'm saying use IndexedDB for my storage mechanism. You can actually change that if you want. And then inside of my page.svelte, all I'm doing is running a subscribe. This code is dead simple. And again, I'll make this public, so put it in the show notes. Again, it's not super full featured, dead simple. We just have a form on submit. All we're doing is we're grabbing our Triplit client, we're inserting a to-dos. As long as it passes the schema, everything's good. To update that data on the UI, all I'm doing is I'm creating a state variable and then I'm subscribing it. When that subscription is up, when that subscription notices a change, it updates the local state and then that outputs here. Is there a better way to do this? Sure. This was a quick little demo.
Cool. I just was curious what else you could use besides IndexedDB locally, right? Like that's what it uses locally, and then it syncs it to the server with whatever database it's using on the server. And you can, by default, it uses memory.
Yeah.
Which memory is the easiest to get up and running, but if you like refresh the page before before you're totally done syncing, then it's gone, right? So IndexedDB will keep it in the browser and allow you to sync it. There's still a chance of losing something, but very unlikely in that case. And then the other option is SQLite, which is cool seems like that's popular in the React Native world because you can have a database on device.
Yeah, the SQLite in the browser world is really interesting. And as we'll see, there's even like Postgres in the browser, which is also very interesting using WASM. So these are kind of some worlds that people are exploring. At the end of the day, most of these things end up kind of just like tossing it all into IndexedDB. And that's totally fine as long as it's fast and it works for you. Next one on here is Evolu. Evolution. It's a shorting of evolution, whatever they want to call this. This one is really sick, and you can tell it's sick just from their banner. A local first platform designed for privacy, ease of use, and no vendor lock-in, right? Like, how good does that sound? And it uses SQLite in the browser, Electron in React Native. It uses its own CRDT. It handles end-to-end encryption. You can have a free server. Now, that's kind of iffy for me if you're using their free sync server, because how long is that going to exist? For me, I'm the type of person that's probably just going to run my own anyways. It uses Keysly as its built-in ORM. So instead of having its own query language syntax, it's using an ORM, Keysly's syntax, which I liked Keysly when I used it here. And it supports all the stuff. It works really well. So this one is very similar to the last option where it does a lot of things for you. The only reason it's different is it does things just ever so slightly differently, right? Another thing is this is really built on top of Effect. We've been talking a little bit about Effect on this show, that the TypeScript platform Effect. So a lot of the stuff in this is being done with Effect. So you'll see Effect all over this code base. Yeah.
And I like the documentation has the first line of the documentation is a quote. If it doesn't work, if the app developer goes out of business and shuts down their servers, then it's not local first.
Exactly. Exactly. And it's fantastic that the software is kind of making a bit of a progress here, but it's also like, it's good for the user beyond just being like a privacy thing. It's good to use these applications. So you can see this code. This is all React code here. I'll show you some of my code in a second. It's not that much different. You're essentially, again, creating a schema, you're creating your tables, and then you're writing your queries. Now, this one is a little bit more verbose to do the same things, because instead of just writing their query syntax, getting some data, subscribing to it, you're writing your query, then you're loading your query, then you're subscribing to your query. Like, it doesn't do it all just at once. A lot of these things, it's kind of interesting, but most times, I don't know if you work with a lot of subscriptions, but when you subscribe to something, you usually get that data right away. With this one, if you subscribe to something, you only get that data if the data changes. So you have to load it first and then subscribe to it, and just to get the data initially. Maybe that's a choice that they made. Either way, this thing's pretty neat because it does have like the owner of the data built in, and it does that all through essentially identification numbers. Like, you can create an owner of this data based on a unique identifier for that user. You can then reset that user. Yada, yada, yada. Now, a lot of these platforms are great too because they handle this syncing over WebSocket, and they have things all stored in like a room type of deal based on like where that data is being stored. And it makes things like multiplayer applications really easy in addition to writing these local first platforms. So this one, again, very, very, very similar. There is some churn in this repo, and not like serious churn or anything, but they mention that if you're hosting your own server, that right now it's Express-based, and they're going to move it to be Express or Effect-based instead of Express-based. So I don't know if hosting your own is, great option right now. But again, hey, it's just the sync server, right? So let's take a look at some actual code here. This is the same thing. The same basic application that I have. The only difference here is that I'm doing it all inside of a Svelte rune here, where this is just like kind of a shell state where you can load a query, it saves the data to rows and row based on what you're looking for, and then you subscribe and it updates, and then it outputs that. Nothing crazy there. So again, I create my to-do table, I create my database, I create some indexes, and then I create my Evolu. I don't know. That's a word I can't say. And then from there, you're pretty much just loading it up. You're running again like evolu.create to do, pass it in. Some of this stuff gets a little crazy. This S decode sync, non-empty string, all this stuff gets a little crazy in here. And to be entirely honest, I don't know why you're doing a lot of these things. They come from effect. I'm just kind of following the flow for these types of things. So I still need to dive quite a bit into effect, given that some of this does look a little intense with the SD code sync, no empty string, 1000 type of deal. But at the end of the day, you're just calling a create command that's saving it locally and updating it. We can see this in action in this one here. Hi, again, you can see nice and fast. This time, you'll notice, check this out. This one actually
it looks like it's using a service worker in this case.
Yes, this one's using a service worker right here. And so, again, these platforms all differ slightly in how they're choosing to accomplish these things. Mm-hmm. But the end result is that they're trying to do the same thing. And I don't know, there's no IndexedDB in this one. Either way, this one is persisting. If I refresh, it comes back. So I don't know why that's not showing up, but hey.
You don't even know where it is?
I don't even know where it is. I thought it was being stored in IndexedDB, but mayto your
stored. Network tab and refresh and see. I'm curious now. If we got to find it. Click on the XHR tab.
Yeah.
There you go. Request payload.
Yeah, it's hitting their syncing server. But is that hitting the local?
I would say turn your Wi-Fi off, but then I would lose you. So don't do that.
Yeah. Yeah, and also I don't have a service worker set up on this anyways. That's a good point. I don't know where this one is storing it. It's funny. I thought I had all that buttoned up, but...
Yeah, click on session. Local. It might be in the service worker.
Yeah.
But shouldn't you be able to see it? That's a good question. Oh, well, you can dive a little bit more into that.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'll have to dive into this one because even then it doesn't feel as instantaneous. So maybe this isn't even storing in my local server at this very second. Either way, this platform is one worth checking out because I think it does a lot of good things for you. And I think it does gives you enough control without making you do too much. Okay. Next one that people often talk about is RxDB. This one is really interesting because, again, it takes the place of your entire database, right? Makes real-time applications easy, sync with any backend. See, this is another one where Supabase really comes into play here because if you're using Supabase, it's really easy to add RxDB to your application. Much easier than it is to just do on your own. Online is optional. Again, RxDB here is kind of like, you could think of this one as taking place of the sync layer, the UI layer, the local storing layer. But then if you're getting into how does this data then store itself on my own database, then you got to start worrying about your own stuff. Also, a big, maybe not a huge bummer about RxDB, because again, these platforms, perhaps like the ones that stick around are the ones that have better paid products. This one does have a lot of like piecemeal type of add-ons. If you want this or that, you want any of these things, you have to add them on as tiers to your pricing, which, I don't know how costly this could get, but it definitely is going to be more expensive than the ones that you're hosting your own syncing server, your own database. Because if you were to add all of these with an employee size of like 10 people here, it would be $200 a month. So that's
pretty pricey.
Food for thought. Yeah, people seem to like this one. This is one that I haven't actually gotten to use personally, but again, people seem to like it. ElectricSQL is one that's been making a lot of waves because this uses
we
Postgres.
Talked about this one.
Yeah, this one uses Postgres in the browser via WASM. It's the standard sync layer for local first apps. Once again, this is a sync layer for local apps directly on Postgres. I wanted to add this to my application using Drizzle. Drizzle now supports their SQLite in the browser, but there's some like iffy things with migrations and stuff there. So this one does seem like it's an interesting option to use, and certainly one that has one of the better like documentation. Like, look at this. You can see local first latency, 5 milliseconds, cloud first latency, right? It does a good job of showing you like why this thing is interesting. Conflict-free resolution and like what you can use it for. So you can see user 1, user 2. You can keep apps in sync. Again, I think this one is great. It might be the type of software that you would be looking to add on to something. It does say drop into your existing stack, drop-in compatible. It works with any of these tools. But a lot of this stuff kind of requires rethinking of how your application works and functions. But if you're using any of this stuff right here, right, if your application falls into this kind of frameworks, there's at least a happy path for you here. So if you're using Prisma with Postgres and React and, hey, you're in a good place. Now, there is some things about switching from Redux, switching from GraphQL, switching from REST. But again, in my experience, a lot of these things are very difficult to migrate an application to unless your technology stack is like tuned to be working. Like, are you in a completely different database tech? Then you're probably not going to want to move to this thing.
I'm curious what it looks like to take something like this and convert like one feature on the website. So maybe we have like a notes feature for like a video, like keep your own notes right here. Like you have an existing tech stack, but this feature would be great offline because people want to watch videos when they're on the train and write their notes, and that would be annoying if they went through a tunnel and didn't have service for a few minutes.
Yes, well, I did just that, and I have some thoughts there. I did that with Replicache, so I'll talk a little bit about that when I talk about Replicache.
All right.
Yeah. So ElectricSQL, really good option, interesting one to try out. I think it's a neat one, and it's one I think that has some of the most juice behind it in terms of, I mean, you can tell their website looks very nice.
Yeah, it looks great.
They clearly have it together. Pouchdb is also interesting here. Now, it basically works with CouchDB as a way to do local first with Pouch and Couch. Now, I never used CouchDB. Honestly, I haven't used Pouchdb. And the thing that kind of turned me off from this was, all right, now I got to learn what Pouch, and I have to learn about Couch, and then I have to learn about how they connect. I have to learn about setting up Pouch, setting up Couch. It's like I got to learn multiple things at once here.
Yeah.
And it's like, all right, I don't need to learn a new DB tech while I'm also learning a lot of other new things.
I've used CouchDB many, many years ago.
Yep.
I've talked when I did like a real-time drawing application for dentists to draw on top of teeth x-rays. So the idea was that like a dentist would get on the phone with a specialist and they would both be on and they would be drawing over top of the x-ray, and the specialist would be like, oh yeah, and then they would draw and circle something. And that required like both real-time as well as saving where they had drawn and who had drawn where. So at the time, this was probably like 12 years ago. And at the time, CouchDB was the hot thing. That's why NPM is built on CouchDB as well. I still have the t-shirt, but it looks like it's owned by IBM now. Yeah.
I actually, I never worked with Couch at all, but it's been on my radar. This is apparently inspired by CouchDB. So I don't think you have to run CouchDB. Like I said, this is not one I got to try out, but it's one that a lot of people seem to really enjoy. So it could be an option, especially if you worked with Couch in the past, and this is like something that you're looking to do. Again, a lot of people seem to really like this one. TinyBase is another one here, going along with like the base kind of naming side of things. And this one's pretty interesting because it does quite a bit more for you in terms of like what it's doing for you. But at the end of the day, again, like many of these things, like what this is it's a reactive data store for your local data. It manages that aspect of things. What it doesn't manage for you is it doesn't manage the server side of your own things. I know this is like the way the industry is, and this isn't like not surprising, but so many of these will only have examples in React, which is kind of a bummer. Like, I get, I don't need like Svelte examples, but like, you could just show like general web platform. Yeah.
It's the same as when you have like an example for fetching data, at least give me a JavaScript fetch and a curl, and I can infer it from the curl if I'm not using JavaScript. But it's the same thing with like, show me React and then show me vanilla JavaScript, because I can infer it to whatever other thing I'm using.
Yeah, because TinyBase, you can see it's like getting started, creating a store, writing and learning and transactions and all this stuff. And then the moment you do, all right, let's see how you do with UIs. React hooks, React DOM, using context. It's like, oh, okay, it's only a React platform, which is fine. That's where the industry is. But like, at least give me the web. Like, show me what a version of this in straight up JavaScript works. Looks like. Yeah.
So this is just a client side library for it's almost like a state management library, and then at the time it comes to syncing, it says you got to figure it out yourself.
Let me confirm that. Easily sync your data to browser storage, IndexedDB, SQLite, CRDTs, and ElectricSQL. So you would use this in addition to another tool, which is also another thing that's confusing, because a lot of these things, like, will say, use YJS and use ElectricSQL, use this and that with it. And I'm like, dude, I thought that's what you were doing. Like, why? What are you doing that's different? So a lot of them fit into very small puzzle piece type positions here. So it's kind of like important to know what you're looking for when you're looking at any of these platforms, in terms of like, what do I actually need? Do I need the whole syncing layer? Do I need just the conflict? And I'm going to handle what happens to save the data locally and the data remotely. I want it to save it locally. I want to handle the sync and the server. Like, what do you need to handle, and what of each of these things fills that space? It's a tough question, which is why this stuff is so confusing.
I don't even know, and maybe you can answer this at the end. What should I use? But it's true. Yes. Like, do you want to go all in and be possibly limited, or do you want to go a little peeled back and have to do a little bit more work? And I kind of just want everything. But I also don't want to be caged in.
I know. I said I want everything in my blog post, and that's where the Triplit and Evolu, those types of platforms. But then there's an inherent sense of like lock in there, and those platforms feel more like Meteor in a way, which I really like, because they do so much for you. And if you're looking for that type of platform, that's great. Now, if you have an existing site, or you know what, honestly, this one, Replicache here, replicache.dev, is one of the services and applications that really, I think it's like what the pros use, right? A lot of people want what Replicache does because it does it very well. And I've gone pretty deep into Replicache in terms of implementing this on my own. And I really think it's a neat platform. That said, this one will really teach you about everything that needs to happen inside of a local first platform, because Replicache holds your hand much less. It does the difficult things for you, but you still need to have an understanding about how it works. So again, this one, Replicache, gives you, real-time collaboration via WebSockets, instant UI loading, because it's all being loaded from an IndexedDB. You can handle your own backend stuff yourself. In fact, you have to. It doesn't have any like automated backend things, offline support. It just works. This one has a pricing where you need to pay a license for it, which is interesting. However, they're not doing anything with that. It's just a license for it. Now, that license is free if your commercial app is making less than $200,000 a year. So if your app is making less than $200,000 a year, even though it's commercial, it's free. If your app is non-commercial, it's free. So you're really only getting to pay like $500 monthly if you're already making $200,000 a year. That's pretty reasonable to me.
It is, but like many things in this world, I think it gets expensive really quickly, right? Like, you got 1,000 users using your application. I guess if you're paying $500 a month. So if you're making at the very basic, if you're making $200K, you're spending $6,000 a year on
syncing
software. Yeah.
Yeah, and honestly, it does a really good job. And that said, there are other cheaper options that, are probably a little bit less interesting. But Replicache, super interesting. I implemented Replicache into my Habits app. Let me see if I can. Let's see if this works, Wes. This is going to be, in fact, let's open up the network tab here. Oh, yeah. So you can see it handled a push and pull. It worked. Oh my gosh, this was not working. It worked last night before I went to bed, but like 11 o'clock, it wasn't working. And so just that simple act of a toggle is doing a lot here. And it might not seem like it's doing a lot, but it's doing a whole lot. And in fact, if we look at any of these like push or pulls, so when I clicked that, it fired off a push event to my server. That push event gave it some information, like in terms of like what the mutation actually is. But it didn't just give it information about that mutation. It gave it information about a lot of mutations. And when we're storing data in this type of thing, we're looking at row versions. We're looking at like, when was this particular piece of data last updated? What version is the server on right now? And the cool thing that Replicache does is it handles all of this through returning patch messages, and then it handles all that data merging and everything. And if you look at your actual IndexedDB for this is what it looks like. It's kind of crazy. It's not like what you might expect. There's a lot of information in here. So how does this one work? What's going on here? Let's take a look at some real code because, like I said, I think this is the one I dove the most into and has the most going on here. So with Replicache, here, I'll show you. I'm initializing it, right? I'm giving my thing a namespace. I'm saying it's in development, its habits, and my user ID. That way, whenever it goes to sync, it's syncing with that very specific type of data. Again, I have a license key for it. And then I give it a push and pull URL. The push and pull URL is like, these are the two routes that handle what happens when I change something client-side and it syncs. Okay? So when I change something client-side, what Replicache is doing is it's running one of our mutations. So like if I create a check mark, all it's simply doing is putting a key in the database. And then it's telling Replicache to fire off a message, a sync message to the server. And that sync server has to accept that patch message, and it has all kinds of information in terms of like what the current version of this is, what the mutation that's being done is. And then on that push server, which let me tell you, this stuff gets a little crazy. That push server, it looks like this. It's crazy. So I have a request handler. I have to open a DB transaction, and then I have to iterate over every mutation that's being sent. I then have to check to make sure that that last mutation is the only one I'm processing, or the only ones that I have, like only the mutations that I haven't processed are the ones that I'm going to process. You have to check all that yourself. It's not going to do all that for you. And then you process the mutations that you haven't processed, and it does those in order. So basically, if I go offline, I do like 5 different things. It stores those as an array of mutations. When I go back online, it sends those to my server and it processes them in order of which they happened.
Oh, that's interesting. So if you like made a to-do and then edited the to-do and then deleted the to-do,
yes,
it doesn't just tell you don't do anything. It tells you to perform all those steps in order.
Yes. And how you handle that is up to you. You could.
Oh, that's neat.
Yeah, so you have full control of handling, because if you look at this, eventually all I'm doing is getting into inserting things into my database directly. So at the end of the line is you are writing your DB calls the same way you're doing it before. You're just handling it in the push server instead of like a route. So typically in an application, you have an endpoint, you send data to it, that data handles the form, it saves it to your database right there. This is sending all these patch messages to one central sink. That central sink is then divvying it out to where it actually saves in your database.
I'm curious about and maybe I'll get into this, but the crudités, CRDTs, in order to if you went offline and you did it on your phone and then you edited it also on your computer and then you went back online, that's where you might have a conflict, right? Do you have?
Yes.
Are you taking any of those into account?
Yeah, you are, and let me tell you that also gets a little bit hairy there, because Wes, let me introduce you to the backend strategies section of the Replicache docs, where it tells you all the different ways you can handle that. And so, guess what? You have to do that yourself. It tells you which are like, this is actually nice, right? The reset strategy. It's easy and it's difficult. It's fast. It's pick any 3 of the angles of the triangle.
Yeah.
The one that I ended up doing was the row version strategy, which has the best performance. Unfortunately, is the most difficult because, hey, YOLO. It has read auth and partial sync. So I thought this was maybe like, if I'm going to go for the do it all myself method, I'm going to go for the row version strategy. I'm going to make sure. So each row has a version to it. Whether or not those versions collide, I don't necessarily know how that resolves. It's a little intense in the code. There's a client version, a server version, and an individual row version. And so we're just making sure that those versions are all correct. I would assume that they're, yeah. I don't know what happens when it gets out of sync is what I'm trying to say here.
Okay. Yeah. There's, I think, and I don't think that this is any software can solve this because it's a
fundamental
lower.
problem.
Yeah. It's a fundamental problem. Like I just took a screenshot of Notion this morning. So I closed my Notion. I had the same Notion thing open in 2 Notion tabs. And then I closed my computer on Friday and I came back today. And there was a little pop-up. You can no longer make edits. You cannot open IndexedDB. Notion's local storage may be damaged. Yep. And I think in that case, like it has to like tell you, hey, like there's nothing I can do here because probably somebody else edited that document and did something different over the weekend while I had that thing closed. And that was fine for me. But at least it tells you, or you can like throw them in a unable to save local storage that you can then just copy paste yourself.
Yep. Yeah, there's different solutions here, both UI based and like backend based. Ultimately, it's tough stuff when you're getting into this. But like, so we had that push server, right? Whenever I make a mutation, it handles the change locally first. It sends that push message off. It also creates a poll. Now it POLLs the PULLs. It pulls the polls so that like every once in a while it's just kind of syncing in the background no matter what anyways. And what that sync happens is it checks the server versions and it checks to see if there's been any changed data from the versions. So if habits has changed or checks has changed, it's going to check to see if any of those have changed. If any of those have changed, it creates a patch. And that patch looks a little something like this. You're saying it's a put operation. This is the key, and this key is for the local data, and this is the value that's being passed in. And then it sends that patch back to my client, where the Replicache client handles that patch. It merges the data locally, and then it reruns my subscriptions. So this stuff, it's like Replicache is doing so much for you here, but the amount that you're still having to learn and pick up on your own is still kind of wild. And I really enjoyed working in this platform once I got it working. And you do have to really get a handle on, all right, where are things being stored? Like if this key doesn't match up with the other key in my patch message, everything's not going to work, right? If my versions are off by 1 for some reason, it's not going to work. I had a crazy bug, Wes, where I had optimistic UI code in my button because when I clicked the button, I wanted to see it flip. I'm used to working on the network. I had optimistic UI. That was being done through a toggle. My local data was returning so fast that my optimistic UI was firing after the local data. so I was like untoggling what I was doing. I was like, holy cow. So that should give you an idea about how fast this stuff can be, which is really the benefit here. So yeah, it's really pretty amazing. I'm going to make some of this stuff public because I wrote this really neat Svelte 5 rune that allows you create a cache, right? It creates your Replicache. So you initialize your cache, and then you can call like cache.sub. So in any of my layouts or anything like this, you can see I'm subbing to habits and checks. And simply by doing that, it's going to populate cache.data.habit, cache.data.check. And those are always staying in sync, no matter what push or pull is happening. If I was on my phone editing something, it would fire a poll on my computer, and that data would update automatically, giving you that whole real-time business that we love and, all that stuff. So that's Replicache. Replicache is really pretty neat. Again, if you want to check that out, I'll make some code public. I'm thinking about doing a whole tutorial series on how to do Replicache in an app-like system. Another one that's really neat is PowerSync. PowerSync is very much in the same space as Replicache. This one, again, what's nice is that they include all the frameworks here. It's not just like, hey, deal with it. Here's React docs. Again, they're thinking about more of the web as a platform. A lot of really awesome people are using this thing. But what PowerSync does is you can tell, again, this one also has pricing. You pay for it. It's a sync server. This one, again, PowerSync SDK saves the data to a local database. It handles the syncing side of things, and then you write your backend writes to any Postgres database. So this one, again, requires Postgres as far as I know, but again, it sets up in this space of handling the harder stuff. Connects to Postgres in a non-invasive way.
In the last one, you were showing me how you had to literally loop over and handle every single one. PowerSync will take care of that and then just give you the what to update.
It takes care of more of it. Okay. With the caveat that you have to be using Postgres, and you're probably going to be wanting to have this set up from the jump. This is not something I think you can just layer on top of existing data, because one thing that you'll notice with any of these, when you start getting into what's stored in the database is no longer just my data. It's my data, it's the version, it's the local cache ID. It's a lot more information. So that way these syncing systems can have an idea about how to actually sync them. So it's no longer just your data, and you have to account for that. But PowerSync, if you want to talk about easy, has an add-on to Supabase like so many of these do. If you want to see the true power of Supabase, just look through how many of these different options utilize Supabase in terms of handling everything. So in this case, if you are using Supabase, it pretty much handles all the stuff for you, and it syncs, it sets up your buckets, it works with the client-side Supabase library, and it does quite a bit for you. So again, this one is a neat option. There is pricing. Let's see. Free soft limits, you can self-host it. Hey, you could self-host it. That's great. And if you can self-host it, that's almost the route I'm going to go to. In this option, if you're self-hosting it, then you'd be having your own sync server, which is its own self-hosted sync server. Then you'd have your database and backend server hosted somewhere else as well. So you might end up having a server, and an app. Or if these two are in the same app, then that's a whole thing as well. So, gosh. This is why I wrote this blog post. If you want to get this distilled in a more written way, you can check out the blog post as well. Check out all of these options. And again, check out any of these other options, because by all means, Auto Merge is a really cool project. Hocus Pocus is a really cool project. I mean, a lot of these are just really amazing. YJS is really great. This is a lower level one that just handles the conflict resolution stuff. So a lot of these things are definitely worth checking out and worth your time. But these are the ones that I've tried. Some do a lot for you, some do very little for you. As you saw all the stuff I had to do in Replicache to get it to work, yes. But at the end result is an application that loads incredibly quickly. This data mutation is happening. It's saving to my database. It's saving locally. It's really, really pretty amazing. So check it out. Let me know if there's any of these tools that you've used, if you're interested in local first software, if there's anything that we didn't touch on in this episode that you'd like to learn more about within the confines of local first, because again, I'm doing a lot here. And if you're interested in maybe picking up some of these libraries or tools, let me know, and we'll maybe throw a tutorial course together.
Sweet. All right, let's get into some sick picks. I have a pretty good sick pick for you today, something that I'm really happy with, and that is a portable tire inflator that has a battery in it. So
yes.
I was going through our van, and we have this big box of ratchet straps and stuff for towing and all that stuff, right? And in that, you also have a 12-volt pump. If the tires go low, you can use that to pump the tires up. And I always found myself hating that, because you have to plug it into the cigarette adapter and hope that it reaches it. And I find myself not using it for the tires all that often. Yeah. I find myself using it for kids' bikes and for basketballs and all of that stuff. Yeah. So I found this one that was very, very small. It has an internal battery in it. it can run wired over the 12 volt, or it can just run off the internal battery. You can use it as a external battery if you want to charge your phone as well. And it's awesome. So the other day, I bought it and I threw it in there, and I was like, all right, I'll test this out. And we had the tire light go on. We had a couple low tires, so I got out, and it's great. You set it to what your PSI should be. You clip it on, and you turn it on, and you can just like let it hang off the tire and sort of just walk away. And you're not sitting there waiting for the thing to pump up. I don't know that if you had a totally flat tire, if it would probably eventually get there. It's obviously a very small pump internally, but it got me up. I was like 5 PSI down, and it took maybe 2 or 3 minutes to get back up. So I was very impressed with it. And being able to just like not be chained down by the huge cord was such a nice improvement. And it comes with like all the adapters to blow up like a pool floaty or something like that.
Yeah. You know what? So I do the same thing with mine. You know, what's so nice about it is not having to hunt for the air things at 7-Eleven or something.
Oh yeah, like you gotta park funny. Whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't care if it takes me an hour because I have to charge it in between. Mine, you have to charge it. Like I can do 2 full tires before I need to recharge mine. So
okay.
I do 2 full tires, recharge, 2 full tires, recharge. Yeah, not a big deal. I'm going to pick actually something very similar because I recently had my car battery die. Kids love turning on those lights and stuff. And a buddy of mine let me borrow a battery-powered car jumper kit.
Oh, I've got 2 of these. They're the best.
They're the best. He keeps it in his car. My car was like, he's like, here, just take this. And it's, again, just like what you said, it's a little battery. It's connected to jumper cables. I was jumping my car because I had to take it. I jumped it with my wife's car. Yeah, that was a giant pain. Her battery's in the trunk. It's hard to get to. And then he gave me this thing. It's like you just set it on the hood, turn it on, you jump the car. Holy cow. So yeah, if you're the type of person that, you know, you worry about having a battery die or something like this, keep one of these charged up, just throw it in your trunk, and you never have to worry about it. So yeah,
they're so good. It's like I still carry jumper cables, but I was thinking the other day, I was like, you probably don't need jumper cables when you have this, because it will give you, like, I've got so many crappy old things at the cottage, old lawn thing, a couple ATVs, and like the batteries on these things always die. And I just have that ready to go, always charged. You can probably get like, I don't know, 7 or 8 jumps off of it. Depends on how big your engine is, obviously. But the other day, some poor guy flagged me down. Hey, can you give me a jump? And I was like, now's my time to shine.
No way. You had it.
I was like, brother, I'll do you one better, you know? No. And I just brought it out, clipped it on. He's like, where did you get that? And I was like, I don't know. You can get them literally everywhere. And the price on them has really come down as well. Yeah, they're great.
You can get them in all kinds of different price range.
Shameless plugs. Let's check out our Syntax merch store. I'm not wearing one right now, but go to syntax.fm, and in the URL bar, not the URL bar, in the navigation, you'll see swag. It'll bring you to century.shop. Got a whole bunch of really cool new t-shirts. We got can coolers or koozies. We got the Syntax deck. We got the Syntax basketball. Some really cool stuff coming up as well. Check it on out. That's it for today. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and we will catch you later. Peace.
Peace.